Our favorite fringe play turns in another big game. Big Ben's clock is ticking, and later in the show, Michael Herbert will not be joining us for our weekly waiver wire pickups. All this and more coming up on the Fantasy Dopes Podcast Week 6 recap. Welcome to the Fantasy Dopes Podcast. I'm your host, Jillian Parker. We have much to get to on this episode, but first, let's bring in the house guru, one who was pretty proud of the results of our first true ranking system, but still a dope, John Fazio. What's going on, John?
Hey, thank you. We had a little backhanded comment there, but it's okay. I take that. I'll own up to it. How was the trip to Detroit this weekend?
What?
Yeah, Michael Herbert apparently lied again, said that you were in Detroit.
No, what? No, what was my reasoning for going to Detroit?
He said that you were looking to see how Theo Riddick was doing after he was knocked out of the game, but I think it's a circle of lies that I'm being involved with, and I'm not liking what
I think he's trying to turn me into a reporter. He's just sending me out on all these fake quests to find players and give updates on them.
Well, that's not as bad as, say, I don't know, being an actual reporter and actually going to these, because we need you. We need you here on the show.
That's true.
So, with all that said, why don't we kick off this little podcast we got for the fine folks on the Fantasy Dopes podcast.
All right, let's get to our ranking recaps from Week 6. Last time we recapped every game and almost every player. But this time instead, we're going to focus on the fringe players who had an impact. You know how your studs did, either putting up a big game or a dud. So let's just get to some of our favorite picks of the week, as well as some of our dark horses that emerged. Coming in at number 1 in our rankings last week was a bit of a sudden move. It was announced early Sunday that Will Fuller would not play against the Colts on Sunday Night Football due to a hamstring injury. Fox Sports' Jay Glazer said before kickoff that he would probably be active, but have a small role in the offense. So why don't you take us through what happened after that was announced, because I'm sure you're ready to push this in everybody's faces, John.
Yes, indeed I am. So when Fuller was taken out and he wasn't going to be used much, I had no choice but to take him off the list. And number 2, which came into being number 1 on my list, was Cameron Meredith, the wide receiver of the Chicago Bears. As you know, he was a big pickup in the waiver wire segment we did last week from Herbert, and I was actually high on him later in the week because I saw that he was basically going to be Kevin White. Kevin White got the bad injury. He's out for the year, and I felt like Meredith was going to be what he was supposed to be in that offense. So even though Jeffrey had a good game yesterday, he still kind of struggled as the number 1 option in that Bears offense. So I felt like Meredith wasn't that 1-week fling. I boldly slotted him up to number 1 once Will Fuller was taken out, playing him over Randall Cobb, which we'll get to in a little bit. So I was nervous just because if he had a bad game, I'd probably lose some credit for that, but I had a feeling he was going to produce, and produce he did, baby. If you had him at PPR, he put up a huge day, caught 11 passes on 15 targets, led the team, obviously, in targets. It's just insane. Had over 100 yards, actually it was 113 yards against that poor Jags defense. So, again, this Thursday night, they got the Packers in Lambeau. I think they're also a bit lost on defense as well. Their cornerbacks have been dreadful. They're missing Sam Shields once again. The offense has been struggling, so I think Hoyer and the Bears put up big numbers against the Pack. And once again, Meredith will make an appearance in our fringe list. I don't know if he'll be number 1, but he will definitely be in top 5, maybe even, top 3 if I were to guess. So stay tuned for that later in the week, but I'm expecting some big results from Meredith going forward here.
Yeah, he will definitely be up there in our rankings, and especially against that Packers defense that did not look very good this past Sunday. On that note, we're going to get to our number 2 and 3 who did not put up a good fantasy day against the Seahawks, and that would be Tevin Coleman and Devonta Freeman. What happened to their run game in Seattle?
Well, you got to give credit to the home team. Fans pretty much took them out. Seahawks virtually eliminated both backs from doing much of anything on the day. Both of them came crashing back down to earth. Freeman had a little bit better production than Coleman did, but I think only because they were just trying to establish a run game with Freeman And he did get a lot of opportunity, but didn't really put up much into it. So I was surprised they didn't use Coleman in their passing game. I felt like they were going to use him more just to get the offensive line moving. But got to give credit to the Seattle defenders. They were a step ahead of them the whole game, and they contained both of them pretty much throughout the whole afternoon. However, I do expect a big bounce back from both backs. The Falcons come home in Week 7 to face the Chargers. So I expect them both to come have a better day against a pretty bad secondary and defense in general. And with them being at home in a dome, I think that'll help them out greatly. So I think they'll still be lingering around the top 15 list in our rankings. But again, you'll hear that once it gets released on Wednesday afternoon/evening.
And this is becoming a consistent topic with me, but I'm going to bring up my guy, or soon to be not guy anymore, Julian Edelman. He finished with only 4 catches for 30 yards. I mean, if you've got him in a PPR league, he's okay to keep. He gets 7 to 10 targets a game, you're okay. But if you have him in a standard league, you are simply lost. He is not doing half of what he did last year. Guru, what say you? I am pretty frustrated, and I believe he is going on my bench this coming week. You keep telling me he's Brady's boy. He's Brady's boy.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point about the standard versus PPR. I mean, targets don't necessarily add up to production because you could have a lot of targets and not have as many catches. But you did allude to the fact that you don't get points for catches. So PPR, that's 4 more points. He had, not a great game. I would say a decent to pretty disappointing day. But it's concerning just because of how many weapons Mr. Angry Tom Brady has at his disposal. I mean, it's going to be tough for owners to leave him on the bench. But at the same token, you're kind of thinking, well, if he's not going to produce, when will he?
Right.
And nobody knows that answer because there's just too many guys. So I could see, your point of view or just any owner that has him and the frustration that you show and the ability that you want to just bench him. So I think it's honestly just up to the person. I just think at the end of the day, if you bench him and he goes off, you can't be mad. You just have to say, well, I kind of learned that lesson. I took a risk and it didn't pay off. And that's what it's all about. So you either bench him or you play him, and you kind of live and die by the sword. So that's my advice.
Yeah, and in standard league, I mean, like I said, you have him in PPR league, by all means play him. I mean, he's getting you some points. But when Julian Edelman and Allen Robinson combine me for 1 touchdown point, it's pretty upsetting. We're going to get to another top 10 guy that the experts weren't as high as we were. And that guy is Terrance West. He finished the week as a top 5 running back play in fantasy. We had him ranked 7th in our fringe rankings. Care to explain why, John?
Well, I tried telling the people. A lot of people didn't want to listen to me, but I just kept going to the fact that it was because of the firing of their offensive coordinator, Mark Trestman. It definitely sparked my interest. I always feel like when these firings happen throughout the season, it just, to me, especially like an offensive guy, to me, the team wants to perform better to impress the new guy. And that's basically what I got. And not only that, but their new offensive coordinator, Marty Mornhinweg, was the former Jets offensive coordinator, and they were going to his former stomping ground. So I felt like he had incentive to put up a good show. And with West, he was ignored the last 2 games on offense. They virtually abandoned the run, and I just felt like they're really going to use him. And they did. He had 23 carries. He only had 87 yards, but he got the 2 scores. And he also added 4 catches for 36 yards as well. So that was a pretty big day. It was a top 5 day, like you said, for running backs this week. With all that being said, they're actually going to be at the same place next week. They're going to be facing off against the Jets. So more incentive for Mornhinweg to pound the rock and get his offense rolling. I'm not saying they'll win or they'll put up like 40 points, but you got to expect another productive day from their offense and more incentive for them to do better with their new offensive coordinator.
And I agree with you there, John. Rounding out our top 10 was Sammie Coates, and he did not produce 1 bit. Were you thinking of taking him off the list when it was announced that he'd start prior to the game?
Well, I was hesitant to take him completely off the list, But I was thinking of moving him down a bit since the severity of the injury was getting pretty much worse and worse as the game was approaching. But he did test it out in pregame and said that he was ready to play, so it didn't seem like he was going to be shunned from the offense. I just think the problem with his start, he did put up a goose egg, which was very frustrating if any owners had him in. But I think it was because of the injury to Roethlisberger. Now, look, to just kind of veer off a little bit, he's one of the toughest players I've ever seen play in any sport. And to come back in after he tore his left meniscus was gutsy and probably stupid. Now, the early reports are saying that he'll only miss this next week's game at Foxborough because they have the bye after that as well. But I'm not so sure he's going to miss just that much time. I mean, tearing a meniscus, that sounds like a 4-week injury, but with the toughness that Roethlisberger had in the past, it may not surprise me. I just would temper expectations just for now, so we'll see how he heals. But getting back to the game, even Antonio Brown struggled as well. So it wasn't a good game to have any Steelers receivers at all. It was kind of a lost game, except if you had Le'Veon Bell, who was just a straight-up beast. He performed for you. But with Coates, got to monitor his situation this coming week and just see how he does in practice. So we'll just leave it at that for now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see how you tear your meniscus and then you only miss a week of football, especially when your team is doing relatively well right now. I just don't see how you put your quarterback in there and risk further injury. But moving down a little bit on the list, we highlight Randall Cobb, who did find the end zone, but his lack of catches was not his fault. Aaron Rodgers hasn't played like his old self and failed to get much going against the Cowboys. Are you concerned about Rodgers' recent lack of play and the impact it has on his receivers?
It is a bit concerning for sure, but I'm not ready to just give up on him yet. He's only had one bad game so far, and they come off this loss to face the Bears at home on Thursday night. I think Rodgers has a great couple of weeks ahead of him as a fantasy starter, but it all depends on his performance against Chicago. You could also point to the lack of depth they've had at their running back position, using Lacy as their starter, even though he was banged up with a bum ankle. Now, James Starks missed a game and with a knee injury, and it was actually reported on Monday afternoon that he's going to need surgery on it, and he's going to miss at least 4 weeks. So it's looking like Ty Montgomery is going to have some snaps at running back and get more involved with the offense because their other wide receiver, Devonta Adams, suffered a concussion during the game as well. So his status is very concerning. Most likely won't play on short weeks rest. So Montgomery may wind up as their third starter with Nelson and Cobb. But getting back to Rodgers, I think his inaccuracy to find receivers all game, except during their touchdown drive, resulted in a poor day for the offense overall. Now, as for his other receivers, Cobb cashed in on Rodgers' only touchdown of the game and finished with 53 yards on 7 catches. Jordy Nelson did not score a touchdown for the first time this season, which is kind of surprising, but I expect him to score against the Bears and return to his old self this Thursday. Now, it is fair to mention that Cobb missed practice on Monday with a back injury. Just keep an eye on it later in the week. Obviously, right now, it doesn't sound serious, but you never know. Just stay tuned to our Twitter. We'll have updates on Cobb as the week progresses. And if Lacy is somewhat healthy Thursday night, they should all be good plays in fantasy. For him to be healthy, though, he's going to have a great week of practice, and I'm not sure that'll happen. So, again, stay tuned for that.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see going from a Sunday to a Thursday night game when you're injured. It's not much time to rest. And it did not take long for Justin Forsett to achieve the starter tag in the Lions offense. However, he did not play like a starter against the Rams. Their backup seemed to be the one to take control of the running game, John.
Yeah, I mean, I have to give Herbert credit for this one. He said that the ranking was a little high for Forsett, and he didn't believe that he was going to have a good day at all. So I give him a lot of props for that, and God bless, as he would say. But getting back to their backfield, Zach Zenner was the one that stepped in after Forsett got a couple of touches. And Zenner actually continued to play pretty decently, put up 58 yards on 14 carries, and he had a couple of catches on 19 yards. So I think Forsett may have more of a role as he continues to learn the offensive playbook more. But I think Zenner gets to start now, especially if Dwayne Washington gets more time off. So he's been with the team for a couple of seasons at least. And like I said, he's been decent as their backup. He hasn't been amazing. But I would still hold off on picking both of these guys up this week because they're facing the Redskins, and they're a pretty tough team on the run. They pretty much shut down the Eagles this past weekend. So if you want to leave them on the wire, just have them highlighted. Maybe put them in the binoculars on Yahoo or star him, wherever you want to do to keep an eye out for these players. They may have bigger days ahead, but I don't see it this coming weekend.
Yeah, as much as I hate to say it, the Redskins are looking good. And speaking of running backs, you said in the last podcast that Chris Ivory was going to outperform TJ Yeldon. Even though the Jaguars' offense hasn't been playing too well this season, Ivory came up with a touchdown and salvaged his fantasy day.
Like I said in the last podcast, they're not going to ignore Ivory after signing that contract to be their back. It's just simple. Yeldon struggled his rookie season, and I felt like the Jags needed a veteran to kind of show him the ropes. Ivory was the guy to come in, kind of set it up, and then when he went down with an injury, Yeldon stepped it up a bit. But I still think going forward, Ivory is going to outproduce Yeldon, barring any further injuries. It may just be for this season, but if anything, this helps Yeldon's production later on next year or even in the future. So Yeldon, I think, is a riskier play, and I think they showed it coming off the bye with Ivory healthy.
And one of the best running back performances came from a guy that was in our top 50 rankings and ranked higher than his starting running back, and that would be Ajayi.
Had the top performance as a running back this week. He had 204 yards on 25 carries and scored twice. And the second one was an insult. I think it was an over 60-yard run. Now, Foster got the start, and I say that quote unquote, because he was only in there for a couple of plays, and then Ajayi just kind of took the ball and ran it down the Steelers' throats. I mean, they pretty much walloped them 30-15. Like I said earlier, Ben got injured. The offense was kind of in shambles. Le'Veon Bell was doing his thing, but that was about it. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how this Miami backfield plays out. They're at home again, facing the Bills. So it'll be a bit of it'll still be a test, but I think we got to put him in our top 25 now for our rankings. I just don't see another performance like this again. But if you started him, hats off to you, good sir or good lady.
I agree with you, John, and I think he might get brought up a little bit later in the show when we talk about our top picks for the week. Somebody else came back from the dead and gashed the Rams defense. Who do you think that could have been, John?
Well, I think from that sarcastic question, I'm guessing you're referring to Golden Tate.
That is correct.
Well, let's put it this way. I don't think a single expert could have predicted a game like this for Tate. He had 8 catches for 165 yards with a score. I jokingly stated on Twitter that he rose from the dead, hence the whole rising from the dead thing. But the great Matthew Berry also tweeted out that Tate had over 60% of his fantasy production in yesterday's game alone. So you can kind of see where I came up with that whole quote. I still think he's one of the riskiest fantasy players to start, and that he should be avoided as much as possible going forward, because he could have another dud next week against the Redskins. If you feel lucky and you want to start him because you drafted him high, I understand, but I am still avoiding as much as possible of Golden Tate.
And another wide receiver not on anyone's radar also played in the same game, and I'm referring to Kenny Britt. Do you feel the same way about Britt that you do about Tate?
Sort of. The only difference I see was that Tate was drafted early, whereas Britt was pretty much nowhere to be found in most drafts across the board. Now, Britt was a much riskier play since the Rams have Case Keenum as their quarterback, but I was digging a little bit more into his stats, and he's actually on pace to have like over 1,200 yards receiving, which is very surprising. So he could make our waiver wire list. You'll just have to stay tuned later. Kind of surprising that he put up a huge day yesterday. It was kind of came out of nowhere.
He did, John. And we are going to go a little bit deeper down the list. We have a tight end that put up a top 10 finish in that position with a minute to go in the fourth quarter. I know you liked him as a deep sleeper, even as a tight end play. So let's briefly discuss CJ Fiedorowicz.
I wanted to rank him a bit higher in these rankings, but again, so much goes into the arm of Brock Osweiler. Will Fuller was down, though, and with that, he put up a very productive day at the position. Caught 6 catches on 7 targets. He had 85 yards and a late score. Now he has at least 4 catches and 5 targets in his last 3 games, and is now definitely ahead of their other tight end, Ryan Griffin. His next game scares me, though, because he's going up against the Denver Broncos Monday Night Football in Denver. So Maybe with Osweiler going up against his team, he might have a little extra emphasis to really stick it to them. But it's just way too risky Monday night in Denver to play anyone except really DeAndre Hopkins and Lamar Miller. So if you want to just add Fiedorowicz for now, you could probably pick him up for free on Fab. And you just want to take a low risk on him in regular wires, you could definitely easily get him. You could probably even let him go and just pick him up for free agency after the wire expires on Wednesday. So I think he has some better productive days ahead of him.
Yeah, John, I mean, Monday night in Denver sounds a little bit dangerous.
For sure.
Finally, if somebody wanted to chuck a Hail Mary and start Wendell Smallwood, hopefully you have return yards and return touchdowns accounted for in your league, since he took one to the house against Washington, John.
Yeah, I thought he would have a little more production, though, as a running back, with Matthews only getting 11 snaps in the game. But the Eagles used 4 of their running backs without anyone having a breakout performance. So right now, I'd hold off on Wendell if you absolutely wanted to. I think he could just be dropped if you have him. If you want to keep him and you don't want to see anybody out in the waiver you want to pick up, by all means, keep him for another week. I just feel like he could be dropped without hesitation, and you have to worry about his next team that he's facing, the Vikings, and coming off their bye, they could pretty much shut down this team. So I would just avoid Smallwood for the next couple of weeks if you can.
Yeah, I mean, the momentum that Vikings team has had coming off their bye week, I'm sure they're expecting to keep it going.
Absolutely.
And that about does it for our recap in week 5. There is just one more deep sleeper that we want to bring up before we hit our commercial break. We want to fill everyone in on Odell's favorite thing in football. John, what is that thing?
It would be our great kicking net. Made another wonderful performance on Sunday. Beckham even proposed to the net, actually, and she said yes.
They might need to start paying that net for all the airtime it's getting.
Seriously, I just want to give out quick congratulations to Nettie and Odell on the engagement. However, I'm not so sure she's going to make another appearance this season. I think McAdoo wants to shut that whole scene down. So sadly, she might be gone from our podcast, from the rest of the football world. But hopefully she makes a comeback. That would be pretty great.
What will we do without Nettie and Odell?
I don't know. I think we'll just have to live by the memories that they've shared the last couple of weeks. It's been a wild, strange ride for them.
It has been an interesting start to the season for Odell and the net, I would say. But nevertheless, happy engagement to them. They're a wonderful couple. And coming up, we dive deeper into the injury report and get you set for Week 6 waiver wire pickups. We will be right back with this quick commercial break.
Want to know which fringe players you should start or sit in your fantasy leagues? Want up-to-the-minute news and analysis from the beat reporters around the league? Follow @FantasyDopes on Twitter to get your fix and fill the void of having to worry about which player will feast or famine.
Welcome back, Dope Heads. Now, before we get into our waiver picks, let's get you caught up with a couple of injury notes. Eddie Royal suffered a toe injury in the second half against Jacksonville. Royal was already battling a calf injury, so there is a great chance that he misses the Thursday night game.
And that means more looks for our boy Meredith.
Yes, more for Meredith. That is right.
We'll have to make that a hashtag. More for Meredith.
More for Meredith. From both me, you, and Michael. More for Meredith.
Yes, I love it.
Up next, the Browns wide receiver Terrell Pryor Sr. suffered a hamstring injury during their loss against the Titans. The significance of the injury is unknown, but will be updated throughout the week before they take on the Bengals in Cincy. We also mentioned Big Ben and Stark's injury earlier, in case you missed that. So thankfully, that will do it for this week's injury report. And up next, we have our top 5 waiver wire pickups for Week 7. I'll let you go first, House Guru. Who do you got on your list?
I'll say this again. If for some reason Ajayi and Cameron Meredith are on the waiver wire in your league, pick them up immediately. By now, they should be owned in most leagues. And if for some reason they're still out there, you're all are idiots. That's all I can say. So with that being said, here are my top 5 pickups, excluding those 2 players. Up first, I have Chris Ivory. We talked about him earlier in our recap. I just believe he'll be the primary running back going forward, and he offers a lot of PPR appeal as well, since he catches a lot from out of the backfield. Now, if someone drops him in your league stupidly, add him back up. If you want to spend around $15 to $19 on him, that should be enough to get him. Number 2 on my list, I have Hunter Henry, one of our favorites of the podcast. Let me hear you say him.
Hunter Henry.
There it is. His role has not diminished since Antonio Gates came back from injury. And actually, news came out today stating that Gates is still not at 100% health. And that may not even be the case for the rest of the season. So if Henry's still out on your waiver wire, add him immediately. Spend around 11 to 15 on him. Number 3 is Ty Montgomery, another guy we mentioned on the podcast. I'd only pick him up and start him in your flex spot this week only. I don't know how much they'll use him going forward after this game, so it could be a nice play if Lacy continues to be hobbled with that ankle injury. Spend around $7 to $9. You don't want to go too much on him if you're only going to use him for 1 week. Number 4, I have quarterback Brian Hoyer of the Bears. He's facing a weak Packers secondary where I thought Dak Prescott would struggle a little bit. He did get that first interception, but he had a nice game. So I think Hoyer's in line for another good day. He's a good streamer. And he might be my top quarterback play in our QB rankings. So stay tuned again Wednesday evening for that. Spend around $6 to $10 on him in Fab. And last but not least, I have Kenny Britt. He'd be at number 3 if Keenum wasn't the quarterback. But again, he had a big game against the Lions. There's no reason for him not to regress this season. So you should have another decent day. If you got him in your league, kudos to you. If you started him, God bless you. But if he's on your waiver wire, spend around 7 to 10 on him, and you should be able to get him. So this is actually the first time you have some rankings on here, Julian. I'm kind of curious. Who do you got?
I do. I was awarded a top 5 rankings for this podcast, and I didn't exactly follow the rules because I put Ajayi number 1 on my list. He scored a touchdown in 3 of his last 4 games with 2 this past Sunday, and he's becoming more consistent. And with Arian Foster still dealing with an injury and him being iffy, you should definitely grab him if he is still available. He is available in one of my leagues, and I have the number 3 waiver priority, and I am crossing my fingers that I can nail him this week. And second, I have got Mr. Marcus Mariota, and he is coming off of his best performance of the season with 284 yards and 3 touchdowns. He's got a lot of momentum right now going up against the Colts defense that is not playing very well. Third, everybody's favorite, Hunter Henry. All I can say is go grab him. He has been consistent with touchdowns in each of his last 3 games, and I have been kicking myself for not getting him when he was available last week. And to top it off, the guy I was playing against picked him up and just sat him on his bench. Hunter does not deserve to be sat on the bench. He deserves to be played, so grab him if he is still available. And at number 4, I have Ty Montgomery listed. With Lacy being questionable, the Packers decided to play Montgomery a lot when Lacy was sitting, and he was played as a running back, and he was Rodgers' favorite target of the week with 12. So I definitely grab him if he's available and put him in your lineup. And to close us off at pick number 5, I've got Torrey Smith. With Kaepernick back, Torrey Smith appeared to be one of Kaepernick's favorite starts. So if you have an open flex spot and you've got somebody you need to fill in for a bye week, I would definitely consider picking up Torrey Smith.
A bit different from mine, but that's totally fine. I mean, last week ours were different and both were pretty valuable. So it's better to get 2 different points of view and thinking on these waiver lists rather than just one.
And of course, we always agree on Hunter Henry.
Yes, always Hunter.
Always Hunter. Well, apparently I don't know why I'm saying that, considering I didn't even grab him. I'm contradicting myself a bit. But that about does it for this edition of the Fantasy Dopes podcast. If you haven't already, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, like us on Facebook, and subscribe to us on YouTube and SoundCloud, all at the username Fantasy Dopes. Also, for our full rankings list and waiver wire list, go to our website at www.fantasydopes.com. And if you like our product, don't be afraid to hit that donate button and help us improve our product. We actually just ordered some nice headsets so we can improve the audio on here, but anything you give will be much appreciated. Plus, include a Twitter handle or name so we can give you a special shout out as well. Anything else you want to add, John?
I think you perfectly wrapped that up. I will say the Instagram is kind of new. Again, like Julian said, it's at Fantasy Dopes. We're going to put up pictures of some food, Sunday eats that we'll highlight each Friday once we get a set schedule and if we can record every Friday. But that'll be on our weekend spotlight shows. We'll have a recipe that we'll share each, and hopefully we can share some pictures out and kind of give you the recipe on that as well. So trying to cover all bases here, trying to create this into a product, but we'll see how far we can take this thing.
Yeah.
So for now, why don't you take us out?
Yes, definitely check out that page and get some ideas for your Sunday Fun Day football eats. On that note, my name is Jillian Parker. We will talk to you soon, Dopeheads. Until next time.
We out. Cheer.
Bye.